state of political parties in Kenya. Joining me to take that conversation forward is Felix Odhiambo. Karibu sana. He is the Executive Director, Electoral Law and Governance Institute for Africa. Also joining him is Omingo Magara. He's the party leader, People's Democratic Party, and he is the immediate former chairman of the Center for Multi-Party Democracy. Happy to have you.
Pleasure to you.
All right, so before we get into it, I would first like to ask to listen to this particular clip of the Deputy President on Sunday.
Anybody who values this country, anybody who values Jubilee Party and the unity that it stands for and the transformation that upon which Jubilee was built will be responsible not to prosecute matters of our party in newspapers on the basis of rumors, on the basis of falsehood, on the basis of propaganda. They should be responsible enough to bring those issues to party structures. Then we can handle those issues and work on the party going into the future.
Evidence there that all is not well within the Jubilee Party. I think it's been playing out in the headlines, Keleweke, Tanga Tanga. Okay, let me just first get your take on the state of political parties in Kenya presently, Felix.
Thank you very much for your invitation. I mean, the truth of the matter is that the state of political parties in Kenya portends a lot to, serious challenges. The regret is that Kenya has been a multi-party democratic state since the restoration of multi-party politics in 1991. And since then, we've held 5 elections. And it's been 27 years since we reverted back to multi-party democracy. Now, political parties play a critical role insofar as the democratic process is concerned. In fact, one of the leaders whom I like to quote on this matter is the Honorable Martha Karua, who at some point say that the state of a country or the democracy of a country is measured on the institutionalization and the state of political parties in that country. Now, if you look at the political parties landscape in Kenya since '91, the truth of the matter is that the political parties are still not very well institutionalized. They are still, by and large, vehicles for contesting political powers, as opposed to representing or aggregating the interest of the public. And yes, political parties are based on weak ideological foundations. Now, if you compare this with progressive democracies in Africa, just about the same time, Ghana introduced multi-party democracy. But the state of political parties in Ghana is so strong that power has, for example, alternated between the ruling New Patriotic Party, NPP, and the Democratic Congress of Ghana. In other words, Ghana is now two strong, well-institutionalized political parties that are responsible for the affairs of the country, and that is part of the reason why the country is very stable politically. Look at South Africa. The ANC has been in existence since 100 years, over a century, and despite the fact that, as I've often said in other forums, the ANC is the only political party in this continent that can recall a sitting president and doesn't break. Now, if you compare that with Kenya, if you remove, say, for example, the Honorable Raila Odinga from ODM, or President Uhuru Kenyatta from Jubilee, or Musalia Mudavadi from the ANC, and things like that, would our political parties stand in the manner that, for example, the ANC has done? So there is a lot to be done. Of course, there's been progress, but I think political parties are still weak.
Okay, and that brings me to my next question for you, Magara. He's saying if you remove Raila from ODM, then ODM is at risk of collapse. And now, if we look at Jubilee, this perceived failure to see eye to eye between the two party leaders, that is President Uhuru Kenyatta and his deputy, is viewed as, what's the word, as a threat to the continued survival of Jubilee Party. What do we need to do to move political parties from being personality-centered?
Thank you for the invitation. And let me say that there's one great speaker who spoke once and said the rate of birth of political parties and mortality in Kenya is about the same measure. They are born quickly and they die quickly. It is simply because You know, if you look at a definition of a political party, it is that group coming together of a group of personalities with the same ideology and in fact of the same political position, and they feed candidates with an intention of realizing a political party's agenda. Unfortunately, and regrettably so, and as a chairman of CMD former, I'll tell you, it actually pains us that we do not have structured political parties based on ideology, their own personalities. That is when bluntly put, and when we're honest to ourselves, because part of leadership is also owning up when there's a mistake. This mischief was being tried to be addressed in the 2007 Act of Political Parties, which said, okay, let us fund political parties across the board to disabuse the thinking that if Felix is the owner of a political party and is funding it, and it's come from a big political, a clan or tribe, he then becomes the party. In fact, at one point, when one of the big parties, not mentioning names, somebody says, my party constitution is my party leader, and therefore he doesn't believe anything else except that person who holds them together, not because of anything else, but perhaps of funding and the tribe it comes from. You're loyal to them, regardless of whether there's a political, democratic way of managing yourself in the structures. So the mischief we wanted to address then was to remove these parties from individuals so that they do not then run the show, because they're the one who pays the piper and it takes the tune. Later on, this act was amended to put a serious threshold to a few political parties to achieve that of maybe 5%, 3% of the votes cast, and then you have about 4 or 5 members of parliament. I can tell you in some communities who will never have, even if they had a party in that region, they can't qualify because their numbers are small. That's why I say, give political parties equal share of political party funding, remove them from the center, and reward those ones who participate in elections commensurate the balance of 85% of the funding to pro rata on the votes cast. And therefore, then if you've got 15% equitably across the board and you participate in elections, you then must work so hard to take a bigger chunk of votes to get more funding. That would have been a fairly competitive way of killing all those small ones, so to say. They die naturally, they're not opposed to legislation, and kind of compelling them to just sing the tune of other political parties or big boys. Why do we have migrations in political parties? Intolerance, dictatorial tendencies. If I don't like your face, Olive, I won't give you a certificate. Sometimes you saw at one point where a certificate is handed over to the person who runs faster to the touchline. Surely, that's not equity. We were saying, based on proper structures of governance, based on ideologies, then we fly. But having to follow it from the Jubilee thinking.
And before we get to that,
Yes.
Felix, his proposal that 15% across the board, and then the balance, the 85%. Based on performance in the election. Do you agree with that? Because you were involved in the drafting of the Political Parties Act.
Yes. First of all, I think the reference that the Honorable Omingo Magara is making is with respect to the 2007 Political Parties Act. Before the Political Parties Act of 2011, we had the 207 Act, and the 207 Act actually made that provision. In as much as majority of political parties, the criteria for dividing the political parties fund established in the 207 Act was twofold. One was that it was pegged on the proportional performance in the ensuing elections in terms of the number of votes that those the political parties got, and that was 85%. And then 15% was to be shared by political parties equitably. Now, the advantage with that is that it expanded the number of political parties who are recipient of the political parties fund. But as I'm sure the former registrar of political parties will tell you, the equitable criteria, which was to give them equally the remaining 15%, there are a number of parties who actually took advantage of it and used the money to build their political parties, as was reflected then in the 2013 elections. But a number of political parties also took the money and disappeared without offices or without a national presence. So that, in as much as we advocated for the equitable criteria, the conduct of the political parties and the political parties' leaders then makes me wonder whether it is fair to go that route. But having said that, the 2011 Act then abolished the equitable criteria and pegged allocation based solely on the performance of the political party in an election, and pegged that at 3%. Now, the consequence of that is that in 2013 elections, only about 3 political parties were eligible, TNA, ORDM, and URP. In 2017 elections, as a result of the 2017 elections, only 2 political parties are eligible, and that is the Jubilee Party and the ODM. Now, the danger with that is this, that there are a number of, if you look at 2017, there are a number of political parties who actually did perform well in terms of the number of MCAs that they got, or members of parliament, or senators, or even women reps, etc. But because, despite the fact that they actually won certain seats, they were left out because they never attained 3% of the national vote. So I think time has come where we need to look at the present act and find a way of rewarding political parties who actually perform better without necessarily resorting to the equitable criteria.
Let me add something on top of that. Let me tell you also, it is a very unfair act. Reason, for example, PDP never had a presidential candidate, right? And therefore, naturally, the people who voted for me had a preferred choice of president, either Uhuru Kenyatta or Raila Odinga. That vote from PDP is tallied on the president, is part of the 3%, making the president qualify for funding. A very serious anomaly. It's just like kids are gathering firewood for the daddy to cook, and when the food's on the table, the kids are locked out of the door. That is not fair play. That either you add that vote to that presidential candidate for qualification, and then the commensurate share of that vote from PDP also goes to the party. That is part of the anomaly that we see in this act that must really be addressed. And most importantly, if we don't address that, these parties then will be either patronized by the payers or the big boys.
Okay.